So what we are going to see today is, we are going to test Web API live. Okay. So before going into the actual testing, right, let's understand few terms basically. Okay. What is Web API? Okay. Uh, so before understanding Web API, first let's try to understand what is an API. Okay. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. Okay. So it is basically a function or interface that provides you a set of functions. Okay. What do I mean by set of function is nothing but that function does some work for you, and underlying mechanism of it is hidden from the user. Okay, just in layman's term. Okay, so let's take an example, real world example of it. Okay, let's take an example of elevator. Okay, elevator has different buttons. Let's say the elevator is for building of 10 floors. Okay, so it has different buttons from 1 to 10. It has a button to open a door, close a door. Okay, and based on the action that you perform, right, when you click on a button, underlying functionality you're not aware of it, right, but it does work for you. So this is a very layman's term example of API. Second one I wanted to give you is operating system functions. Okay, for an example, you are opening a file, right? So underlying, you don't know what is happening behind the scenes, but it's a function, right? Or it's an API that tells the operating system that I wanted to open this particular file. Similarly, another example would be, let's say you're trying to close something, right? Or you're trying to shut down a system, right? So these are nothing but API calls uh, that interacts with your operating system and does the operation for you. So this is just brief of what is an API means. So basically, it's a function or an interface that gives you ability to perform certain actions. Okay. Now let's move on to, now we understand what is API. Now let's try to understand what is Web API. Okay, so Web API is a application programming interface or an API that works over internet. Okay, what do we mean by internet is, let's try to understand with these particular terms. Okay, so client can be anything. Maybe it's mobile device from you're opening a website, or a laptop or a desktop. Okay, that is nothing but your client. Clients can be a web browser. Okay, or maybe a web or maybe a mobile application, or a desktop application as well. Okay, so client is nothing but who is requesting something from the server, and the server who is the responder who responds to your request over the internet. Okay, and how they communicate? They communicate over HTTP. Okay, so they communicate over HTTP. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So when you say a web API, right, or a web request, right, it consists of different parts. First is nothing but the protocol, which could be HTTP, or if it's a secure, HTTPS. Okay. Then what we have is, after HTTP we have a base URL or a host. You can use this term interchangeably. Then what you can have is, if you could see, this is API v1 is nothing but the version of API. Employee is nothing but resource, the resource that you are requesting. Okay, could be an employee. Just this is just an example. Okay, you can have different type of resources, like it could be you can get orders, you can get photos, images, and so on. Okay, and the last part of a valid request could be either a query parameter or a path parameter. So here, this is an example of query parameter. You can also have a path parameter as well. Okay, so this is a structure of an API request. Okay, now let's try to go ahead and see, so so basically this is nothing but a valid request pattern. Okay, but how we can test whether it is returning a correct value for us or not. Okay, so based on your request, we can have different status codes like 200 series status codes are nothing but success. That means whatever you had requested or whatever you are trying to create uh, is resulted into success. Okay, there are 400 status code where there is something wrong with the client, meaning you are trying to request uh, a resource that you are not authorized to do, meaning there is something wrong with the sending the request, or you don't have permission to access that particular resource. And the last thing is 500 server error. That means the server itself is not working properly. There are server side issues as well. So these are the status codes that we'll try to test in today's session basically. Okay, uh, so without wasting a time, let's get on to a demo. Okay. So so in order to keep it interesting, what I'm trying to do is we'll try to build an API first. Okay, and building an API means we are not going to build anything fancy, but we are just trying to retrieve the different responses from the API, like 200, 201, 404, something like that. Okay, I never thought, I don't have anything in mind as such, what kind of, but let's try to build something around it, and maybe let's demonstrate how we can test that. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll quickly open my IntelliJ. Hope my screen is visible to everyone. So I'll just quickly open my IntelliJ. Okay, and let's create a new project. So basically, I'm using Quarkus. Okay, Quarkus is nothing but uh, which is similar to Spring Boot, which allows you to create different API based application or microservice based application. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll give a name to a project. I'll keep, let's say, test tribe as path. In class name, I'll give you, let's say, test tribe. Okay, or I'll keep this as it is, and let's say code with Veer. Okay, this is my artifact. I'll go next. So as we wanted to develop a web API, right? So there are certain libraries that you need to use, like Classic and REST Jackson. So basically, these are some of the dependencies that are needed in order to uh, start with the things. And I will also include small open API, so that it will also create a documentation for whatever the API that we are writing. Okay, so I'll just give the project name is like code with Veer, and I'll just click on create. So what basically it will do is it will create a very basic project for you, and it will create one ready to use endpoint. Okay, so let me just quickly show you that. So if you could see, it has created one Java class where path says hello, and it produces a text in a plain format. Okay, now what we'll do, we'll try to run this code. Okay, and let's see whether our API is working properly or not. So how to run this file is, you can use Maven command basically. So this is the command that you can use. So I'll just go to the terminal, paste that, and boom, your API has been started. Okay. Now, if you could see, I have, this is the URL. Okay, localhost 8080, where our API is hosted. This is nothing but your host. Okay, or a base URL. What I have, what the slide that I have presented, right, where I have mentioned, that the base URL is there. So let me just quickly go to that particular site. So this is the thing, right? This is nothing but base URL. So in this case, localhost 80 is nothing but our base URL. Okay. Now what we will do, we'll try to, you know, execute the endpoint. So here the path is hello, and okay, and if user browse to this particular path or goes to this particular path, what we are saying is return me hello rest easy. Okay, so now let's see whether that is returning us hello rest easy or not. Okay, so I had added a path as hello, and if you could see the response, right, hello rest easy. Okay, now let's try to see, if I update the value, whether that API is returning that particular result or not. Okay, so let's say I return hello test. Okay, I'll save this and I'll just go back to the browser and see whether the it is returning me value or not. So it is giving me hello test try. Okay, so this is, very basic API that we had developed. Okay, now let's. So this is not we generally have when we test APIs, right? So this is nothing but we are getting a 200 status code, right? What we'll do, we'll run this particular thing in the postman as well, so that you will be, side by side we'll test there as well. Before that, what I'll show you is, so as we add certain things over in our documents, right, it will also create some documentation for us. Okay, so if you could see, this is nothing but a hello endpoint that has been written. Okay, and what it does is listed over here, like, it gives a 200 status code, which is nothing but okay, and it returns us a plain text. Okay, we can test it from the Swagger UI itself. Like, you have to just click on this tryout. Okay, and once you click on tryout, it will give you an execute button. Once you click on it, it will return you the same response that we had seen on the browser. Okay, now let's try to build something more interesting. Okay, when I say interesting, let's move on to the code ID, and let's try to build another API. Let's say it's again a get request. Okay, which produces uh, a JSON. Basically, it gives you a JSON response. Okay, and let's say the method is, let's say, public response. Let's say get errors code. Like, let's so here what we are going to do is we are trying to simulate some error status codes, like 404, or I'll try to give some examples over here. Okay, so what we can do, so basically whenever you write an API, right, uh, you can have different status code. Okay, response dot status, and you can pass like response dot status dot, let's say I wanted to give a response back as a bad request. Okay, so that means something is wrong with your data. Either you are passing invalid data, or there is something wrong with your data. And how you can get a typical type of response, right? Maybe let's say, uh, let's try to build this. Okay, what, and let's see what, and I'll add a path as, let's say, in hello, let's say I have a error as another path. Okay, another resource, I would say. And now I'll go back and I'll just refresh this particular page. So if you could see, it has given me another resource over here. Okay, and let's try to execute this now. So if you could see, it has given me a 400 error bad request in a response. Okay, but this response, it's like, it just given me a response status code, right? Let's try to build something meaningful around that response. Okay, so what I'll do, so basically you can pass an object or an entity, maybe to a response itself. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll create one hash map, uh, which is, very easy to convert it into a JSON basically, or object. basically is equal to hash map. I'll just create one hash map, and what I'll do, I'll put uh, status code, comma, let's say response dot status dot add request dot get status code. So this is nothing but it will give you a status code like 400 or whatever the status code will be. And map dot put dot message. Okay, let's say message, and let's again, instead of get status, let's say get phrase. Okay, that means it will return you some text. Okay, and now I'll save this, and if I go back to the page, now what you will see is, when you click on tryout, right, and if you execute again, so now I think it has not saved. Let me just save it again. Oh, sorry, we haven't passed that object. So here what you can do is you can pass uh, entity, and the object is nothing but the map that we had created. Okay, so once I do this and save, and again I go back to the API over here, and if I refresh this and again hit this, you will see a message as a bad request and status as a 400. So this is, way the developer writes and it returns you some, invalid status code whenever you try to, test the APIs. Okay, so exception handlings, I would say, could be, could be a scenario where you wanted to test certain things. So this is, I'm just, mocking certain status code so that you can understand when you are actually testing your web APIs, right? You will get to know that this is the status code, right, that is responsible for returning this particular type of message. Okay, now let's try to build another thing over here. Okay, so we had seen at 200. So we'll follow the same thing, and let's say I'll copy this. Okay, and let's try to build one post endpoint. Okay, I'll just paste it over here. Sorry, just copy this. I'll paste it over here. The path will remain as, let's say, I'll say user. Okay, and let's say it's a post request. Okay, and let's say get, or say create user. Let's try to create user, and we wanted to pass user info. Okay, as a user info. So there is no class something like that. So what we'll do, we'll create a class with user info. Okay, and in that class let's create two variables. Okay, let's say a string user name and string user password. Okay, and what we will do, we will create a getters and setter for this. Okay, so let's say we create getter and setter for this both. Cool. And now let's go back to the uh, example resource. Okay, now if you could see, we have that user info added over here. Okay, now what we will do, what we'll do, we'll try to return status as okay, or say let's say created. Okay, and we will pass the user info, whatever the user has entered, we'll try to pass it in the response itself. Okay, so again I'll go back to the browser, and I'll refresh the page again, and you could see a post endpoint has been listed. And if you could see, it has returned you the schema as well, what information user need to pass. Okay, to this particular endpoint. Okay, and if you could see, it will give you example request as well. What you have to pass. Okay, now let's try to test this out, and let's say I pass it as a vir, and let's say vir at the rate 123. And if you execute this now, it should ideally return you the same whatever you had entered into a response body. Got it? So this is another way how actually the application functions, right? You send some request as a body, and based on that it returns you a different status code. So internally what will happen in this case is it will create that particular resource into actual database. Okay, so I'm just trying to simulate different scenarios that you do in real time. Okay, with the with APIs. Like I'm trying to build some API, and simultaneously I'm trying to show you the different status codes for it. Okay, now let's try to do some more stuff. Okay, let's say what I'll do, I'll just open a postman. Okay, and from there what we will do, we'll try to test the same things. Okay, so quickly I'd open the postman. Now let's create new request. What I'll do, I'll just so what we'll do, I'll just copy this base path localhost 8080. I'll go to the postman. Okay, and let's say we are having hello slash user, and it's a let's try to execute this now. So we are trying to as it's a post request, right? But let's try to make it as get, and let's see what it returns. Okay, so if you could see, it has returned me a method not allowed. Okay, that means it's a not a valid request that you are trying to do. Now let's try to use a post. So again, it says we haven't passed anything into a body, right? That means this is another scenario that you can test out while you are doing actual testing for an API, right? You have trying to create something using a post endpoint, but you didn't pass what to create. Okay, so it has returned you unsupported media type. Now let's try to put some valid, or say let's say invalid data. Let's say test, and let's try to execute. So again, it will see unsupported media type, because what it accepts, it needs a JSON basically, and in JSON what it basically needs as per the spec is it needs a username and password in JSON format. Okay, so what we'll do, let's just I'll just copy this. Okay, and I'll go back to the postman. I'll paste it over here. Now instead of Veer, let's say I'll add Arun at the rate 3. And now let's see whether it is return your result or not. So if you could see, it has returned your status code as 2201 created, and whatever the things that you had added, it has returned you. Okay. So this is so far, you can test it out. Plus, let's try to simulate some 500 status code as well. Okay, let's try to build some error code, which is give you a 500. Okay, now what we'll do, I'll just copy this. We'll use the same post request. Okay, create user, and let's say we'll put everything, and let's give a status as um, bad gateway. Okay, something is bad with the server, and what we will do, we'll pass the user info, or yeah, user info, there itself. Okay, and now let's try to execute. Let's make it as users. Okay, and let's try to execute that particular endpoint. Okay, I'll just hit it again. So it has returned you the response, plus it has returned you bad gateway. It has returned you the actual data as well, because we haven't changed anything in our code. Let me just show you. So we are just passing the entity as is. That's why it is returning your user info. What we can do is we can even pass a string, like like string of response dot status dot bad gateway plus some message. Let's say I wanted to pass message as received an error server. Okay, and it's a string, right? So you have to change the media type to plain text plain. Okay, and if I go back, if I execute again, it returns you bad gateway, and it will give you a string as well. Bad gateway received an error from server. Okay, so this is what I wanted to showcase you. Plus, what is more important, right? When you're testing, uh, web applications, is right. Uh, I'll try to explain those points to you guys. Okay, so here we have seen different status codes. So that is pretty much important when you are testing. Okay, testing different status codes. Okay, and where you will get this information, so you can always ask developers about the Swagger documentation or open API specs for your application API endpoints. Okay, because that is the place where you will get number of information about your APIs, like what are the different methods it allows, what are the valid request body that it expects, what are the responses that it returns when you are testing the endpoints. Okay, so if you wanted to play around certain endpoints, right, I'll share some resources with you that will give you. We'll try to test that as well. I'll try to test one or two from those that particular page, and you can play around that particular endpoint. So what I'll do, I'll just open one so dummy website. Okay, I'll share this. I'll just copy that. Okay, just this is a flat Z fake store API. Okay, so it has different set of endpoints available for like so these are the different features that you can test out whenever you are testing web applications, like whether your API support pagination, whether your API has authentication, because the current API that we had seen, right, it doesn't have any authentication maps. Like then there are different resources that it has, and what it returns, right, what in response it gets. So it has detailed documentation around it. Okay, so now let's try to test out a few of these things, and let's see how it responds to your request. Okay, so first thing what we'll test is get all products. Okay, this endpoint. Okay, so let me just copy this and go back to the postman. I'll create a new request. Again, it's a get request. Okay, and just try to hit this. So if you could see, it has returned set of products from the this particular endpoint. Okay, now let's try to do one thing. Okay, go back to the documentation. So it has filter products. Okay, filter products, in the sense it allows you to uh, filter a particular product, or let's say I wanted to retrieve only one product. Let's see, there is an option to find a particular product or not. Let's try to find out in the documentation itself. Single. Okay, so there is an option to retrieve a single product. Okay, so let's go back there into the postman and let's try to. So let's say it's a 48. I wanted a product with ID 48. Let's try to open that. So it returned you a single product. Okay. Now let's try to do some negative testing. Okay, like let's say I wanted to get a product with some random number, and let's try to hit whether what it returns to you. Okay, so if you could see, it has given you a proper message. It's return a path, timestamp, entity not found, could not find an entity of type product. Into that. So everything is detailedly given in the response. And if you could see, right, it has something bad with user input itself. So it is returning you 400. That is nothing but a bad request as a status code. Okay. Now let's try to put some garbage over here. Like I to put a string over there, and let's see what API returns you back. Okay. So if you could see, it has again given you a bad request, but again the messages are different. Like it has given you a validation field. Okay, because it expects number, but you had provided a string. Okay, and it has returned you a bad request. Okay, now let's try to find one of more scenario that we haven't uh, tried to go, and let's try to update something like okay, um, update a particular product. Okay, now let's go back and let's say I think we had 48, right? We had retrieved the product 48. Okay, now let's try to, I'll just duplicate this particular request. I'll just first save this. Let's say get, let's say test, save. I'll duplicate this request. mm, and I'll make a post request. Okay, and what we will do in body, we'll paste a JSON that we had copied. Okay. We are changing the price. So what it has, we'll change the title and price as well. Okay. So what we are doing this, and let's try to execute this now. So it has returned a cannot post not found. Okay. So I think that product is not available for I'm not sure why it has returned. Why? Maybe some issue with the endpoint, but it hasn't updated that sorry, I think I had used a wrong endpoint, I guess. Let me just, it's a post request basically. So let me just try to do it again. Yeah, so if you could see, it has updated. Sorry for but that glitch. It was a put request because we are trying to update certain thing, right? So post is nothing but to create, put is to update. Now let's try to again update. Let's say I make a price as 1000, and let's say change title again, and let's try to execute. So if you could see, it has changed the price as well as the title. Okay, now let's try to find out one more use case, and then maybe uh, we can stop for the today's session. Yeah, maybe we'll try to find out this pagination thing. Okay, let's try to find out the pagination part as well. Okay, so here if you could see, it has offset and limit. Okay, so I'll put this first, and then maybe I'll try to explain uh, the details about it. Okay, so products will return you the list of products. Okay, that means all products. Sorry, it's a get request. I'll just go back. So it will return you all the products for you. Okay, now let's say so when you see from UI, right, if everything is coming at one place, right, let's say there are thousands of records and those are coming at one place, at one request, right? Excuse me. So what will happen? Your application performance will be degraded. So for that purpose, you need a pagination on your website, or for your products basically, product websites basically. Okay. So here, what I'm saying is, give me 10 records. That means limit will decide the how many records you want, and offset will decide from where to start. Okay. So what it will do, it will skip your first 10 records, and from there it will return your 10 records. Okay. So if you could see, it has returned based on, again, if there are those many records, it will return you those records. Otherwise, it will not. Now if I change the offset to, let's say, 20, and again I'm requesting 10. If there are no records, it will not return you. Okay. If there are records, it will return you. Now, so this is the way, you can, use uh, the the filters basically, or the pagination basically on your website. Okay, we'll see one more endpoint, that is nothing but JWT. That how how basically you can use authentication for your application. Okay, so let me just go back. So this is the request. Okay, so what this request basically does is, based on the username and password, it will return you access token, and this access token will be used for your subsequent request. Okay, so let me just go again and duplicate this one. I'll just paste it here, and in body, what we'll do is we'll paste the JSON that is available on this page. Okay, and let's try to execute this and see whether what we are getting. So if you could see, it has returned you access token, and this token can be used for your subsequent request. Okay, now let's try to change the some invalid email address, and let's see what it gives. So it gives you 401 unauthorized. Okay, so that's it, guys. That's what I wanted to share with you. Hope you have learned something new in this session. I'll stop sharing my screen. Okay.